They invaded peaceful nations.
This is a criminal regime.
Slaughtered innocent people.
They're performing murder and terrible crimes, but at the same time trying to make it look as though it's correct.
Committed genocide.
He likened the Jews to a virus.
But how did Adolf Hitler and his small band of criminal conspirators persuade the German people to follow him on this horrific path?
He's clearly insane. His mouth would foam with rage, as he's like a sort of a rabid dog.
This series offers a unique perspective on the Third Reich. It shows how Hitler and his inner circle created an illusion of justice and legality, while behind the scenes they subverted democracy and planned a monstrous secret conspiracy based on a warped ideology and phony science. It's the story of a gangster regime that used not only violence and suppression, but which carefully groomed the German people into willing complicity in the worst crimes in history. In Munich, Hitler has now risen to head of the Bavarian Kampfbund, a loose affiliation of fellow right-wing revolutionaries.
The so-called Combat League, a set of disparate nationalist militarist groups in the early 20s.
The group is united by one thing: the Weimar Republic must go.
Hitler thinks this is his moment. There's chaos. This is the perfect time for our battle group to actually seize control.
The only question is how. The inspiration comes from abroad. Europe's most successful fascist, Benito Mussolini, storms to power in Italy just months before, in October 1922. He has acquired huge popular support and marches on Rome with his 30,000 black shirts.
Mussolini gets this band of fascist supporters. They then march through the streets, they go to the palace of the king, and then Mussolini takes power. So this is a very romantic notion of how you can overthrow a major government and take power.
Mussolini and Hitler had many parallels. Like Hitler, he was a former soldier. He had also been wounded. Like Hitler, Mussolini, a former journalist, understands the power of the press. And while Mussolini has his black shirts, Hitler has his brown shirts.
Hitler hears about this and he thinks, this sounds like a good idea. We could do this here. We could take power in Munich and then march to Berlin. And as we go to Berlin, we can get all the people who want to get rid of the old democratic government and overthrow it. That's the idea. So the plot starts to hatch.
Finally, with 2,000 men, including Ludendorff and Goering at his side, the Nazis march on central Munich. But the authorities are waiting for them and have prepared defenses. It is the moment of truth. It seems as if it is all over for Adolf Hitler. He is arrested. His Nazi party is disbanded for starting a coup. His newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, is also banned. Nevertheless, even though he seems to be facing disaster, Hitler has learnt a crucial lesson that will ultimately carry him to power. Being on the fringe of politics won't work. Most people don't support parties that try to seize power through force. If he wants to fulfill his destiny and become the leader of Germany, he will have to find another way.
The main lesson that Hitler learnt from the putsch was that violence doesn't work, especially unsuccessful violence.
He realised that if he was going to come to power, he'd have to do so legally.
You do it constitutionally by using the electoral system. We'll carry people with us. We don't need a majority even. We just need to be dominant in our thinking.
So, even though Hitler's coup looks like a total failure, in fact, the rise of the Nazis is only just beginning. His audacious attempt to seize power in a coup has been an embarrassing failure, and he's going to jail. His Nazi party, seen only as a band of fringe revolutionaries, is on the verge of being shut down. But Hitler has a plan. He's going to take the Nazis into the mainstream of politics.
He wanted to become a respectable parliamentarian without being any of those things.
Purpose, love of the nation, nationalism, that'll take us through. That will carry the day. And it does.
This is the story of how Hitler's reinvention of the Nazi Party and a financial catastrophe opened the door for him to win the hearts and minds of the German nation. Adolf Hitler is led into court to stand trial for high treason. 4 months before, Hitler and his National Socialist Party had attempted to overthrow the German Weimar government in Munich. But they had failed.
For leading an attempted coup against the state, Hitler gets the grand total of a 5-year sentence, which is incredibly short. He's lucky, actually, to not got a death sentence.
Hitler's interned 40 miles west of Munich in the picturesque town of Landsberg. And he's treated like royalty in exile. With his newfound celebrity status, Hitler uses his prison stay as a PR opportunity, inviting his own photographer to record his incarceration. It's just one of a number of privileges he's given behind bars.
Hitler would later make out that his time in Landsberg prison was pretty hellish, but in fact the truth was quite the opposite.
Hitler decides to set down on paper his own beliefs.
If you're going to be a National Socialist Party, you're competing with the Communist Party, and they have a book on which they base their ideas, which is Das Kapital by Karl Marx. So he decides that the Nazi Party needs a philosophical tract where he can outline the ideology of the party.
Imprisoned with him at Landsberg is one of Hitler's co-conspirators from the beer hall putsch, Rudolf Hess. Now acting as his private secretary, Hess takes dictation from Hitler day after day as he embarks on the book which will define Nazism. My Struggle, or Mein Kampf, is supposed to be a deep personal statement from Hitler.
It's the man talking about himself and his ideas for the first time in a systematic way. And that's why it's so significant.
Distorted tales about Hitler's childhood, his early youth in Vienna, and his war experiences are mixed together with political and racial theorizing. But the concepts within it aren't his own.
Mein Kampf really is based on a number of ideas that he's heard. It's kind of a melting pot of ideas robbed from philosophy, taken from, you know, the back of a beer mat. Really, it's a kind of mishmash.
At its heart is Hitler's belief that the Aryan German people are the natural master race, and that Germany's biggest enemy are the Jews.
The personification of the devil, as the symbol of all evil, assumes the living shape of the Jew.
Hitler believes that the Jews are a genetically inferior race, and that they're to blame for everything that's wrong with Germany, including the country's capitulation in the First World War and its economic plight.
He is and remains a typical parasite, a sponger who, like a noxious bacillus, keeps spreading as soon as a favorable medium invites him.
On top of this, he blames them for communism.
In Bolshevism, we must see the attempt undertaken by the Jews in the 20th century to achieve world domination. He goes his way, the way of sneaking in among the nations and boring from within, with lies and slander, poison and corruption.
Mein Kampf even contains a frightening warning about Hitler's intentions.
The whole text is shot through with incredibly violent language. Page after page, we get the language of eradication, annihilation, destruction, extermination. Hitler believes the only way to solve the Jewish problem is to destroy the Jewish parasite. There can be no doubt that if Hitler comes to power, there is going to be some kind of a reckoning with the Jews.
After serving just 9 months of a 5-year sentence, the 35-year-old Hitler prepares himself for his release. Despite being sent to jail for trying to overthrow the German Weimar government, in the year since his failed coup in Munich, he's transformed himself from violent revolutionary to national hero. But the wave of popularity doesn't last. While in private, Hitler had been preparing his Bible for Nazism. Outside prison, he's been practically forgotten. And if he expected a horde of well-wishers at the gates, he doesn't get them. Instead, there's only a car to meet him. The reason? Germany is booming. The democratic government has borrowed billions from overseas to pay its war debts. Now the country's growing fat on foreign money, particularly from the United States.
The mid-1920s are very much the golden years of the Weimar Republic.
The Americans give them a vast range of loans, and because of this, Germany revives. The German economy improves dramatically enough for the Weimar democratic government to look like it's starting to work.
At last, it seems like the days of suffering are over.
It's very much seen as a period of new beginning. After the turbulence of the hyperinflation, things are looking up. People are broadly happy with the political system as long as it delivers the goods, as long as it delivers growth and stability.
But for Hitler, all this prosperity is disastrous. In order to rebrand the entire Nazi Party, Hitler recognizes he needs the help of a man like Goebbels. With restrictions still placed on the party in many places across Germany, Hitler needs someone who can attract new voters.
Goebbels was a man who understood intuitively modern methods of propaganda.
We see a shift towards the print media by necessity because Hitler's prevented from giving those public speeches, but that then sets the tone for very much. A whole range of Nazi newspapers, Nazi magazines emerge. The Nazis are right there leading from the front when it comes to the pioneering use on leaflets, in illustrated papers, on election posters.
Hitler's so impressed by Goebbels, in November 1926, he hands him the important role of taking the Nazi Party message to the nation's capital, Berlin.
Goebbels came to Berlin in 1926 as an outsider. He didn't know the city. And importantly, this was not a city in which the Nazis were strong. Berlin had a reputation then as a communist stronghold, a trade unionist stronghold, and Goebbels therefore was tasked by Hitler with a very difficult mission.
Berlin always left-wing in sympathies. The eastern side of the city certainly to a large degree controlled by the communists, and it became Goebbels' job to win Red Berlin for the Nazis and to wean it away from communism.
Goebbels has lorries scatter leaflets through the city streets, pastes the city walls with red swastikas and posters, and uses his Berlin newspaper, Der Angriff, the attack, to feed Hitler's political ideology to the masses. Hitler's central political thrust isn't racist, but economic. He warns that the country's booming economy is propped up by American money, which, if pulled out, will see Germany collapse.
The phrase that Hitler uses in some of his speeches is that Weimar is dancing on a volcano, and that really all of this prosperity is down to loans, and eventually it will all collapse and Germany will go back into a terrible state of depression again for relying on these American loans.
But when the election results come in May 1928, it's a shock. The Nazis receive just 2.6% of the vote. The Communists, Hitler's main rivals, have gained 4 times more support. Hitler and his party have done worse than they did in the 1924 elections. The new image hasn't worked. It looks like the Nazi party's going nowhere.
They were still an extremist party on the fringe with a minuscule percentage of the vote. But you have to remember that Germany was still enjoying a spell in the economic sunshine.
Nazism was like a snowball. It flourished in cold, dark times, but you subject it to sunlight and it will melt. And if the economy is the sun, that's what will happen to Nazism. It'll only be strong in critical times. It's a party that depends on extreme conditions. It won't be strong when things are going well. And 28 is an interesting commentary, really, on that. The party couldn't make inroads.
Hitler and his inner circle despair that they will ever gain power. It seems the legitimate route has failed. But an earth-shattering event changes everything. On the 24th of October 1929, the stock market in Wall Street crashes. As Hitler had predicted, American banks call in their loans in a frantic effort to save themselves.
When America ran into trouble, then it pulled in its horns, it stopped buying goods, it stopped loaning money, and every country suffers because they're all tied into this international system.
The Great Depression sees countless thriving businesses plunged into bankruptcy all over the world. In Germany, the effects are devastating. Without their US loans, banks collapse. Unemployment shoots up dramatically. In just 8 weeks, it rises from 3% to 26%.
Germany increases its unemployed by 6 million. And when you think that another 3 people are affected by an unemployed person in the house, that meant 24 million Germans were affected by the Wall Street crash.
Virtually no one escapes its effects. People who'd painstakingly built up their savings after the hyperinflation of the early 20s are hit hard.
The middle class were again faced with a renewal of the nightmare that they had seen around about 1923, when the huge inflation beggared them, actually wiped out their savings almost overnight.
Humiliation and misery is compounded by poverty and starvation as parents struggle to feed their children. Chaos returns as the German people increasingly lose confidence in the Weimar Republic.
Germany really is in a terrible state, and you can see that by what happens very quickly. It's the hunger, it's the poverty, it's the real desperation that comes to Germany out of that Wall Street crash that we see the seeds of the turn away from democracy and towards the Nazi Party.
One man had predicted this all along. Suddenly, people are seeing him differently. Adolf Hitler's no longer a radical extremist. He's a prophet.
What he'd said would happen has begun to happen. Who is to blame? Well, at our distance removed, we say, well, it's a matter of international finance. But to the Nazi, international finance was Jewish finance. This is a great plot, as Hitler sees it. We told you what was happening, and now here's the proof positive.
With the German nation in despair, at last Hitler has the real opportunity he's been waiting for. Crucially, many of those who've suffered most as a result of the Great Depression are those who had ignored Hitler and voted against him. Now they are ready to listen to his message. The Nazis are on the rise.